Welcome back, Sebastian here. Time for my power rankings for the 2024 British Grand Prix. Of course, very eventful Grand Prix that we had yesterday. And of course, a lot of changing conditions. Strategy was very important as well, which I did try to factor in when grading the drivers and deciding where to rank them. Drivers who have put on abysmal strategies through no fault of their own. I'm looking at you, Ocon and Joe. I tried to factor that in when ranking them. So let's see, starting with number 20, one of those drivers who was on the abysmal strategy was Sergio Perez. Now for Perez, qualifying we know was a disaster, crashed out in Q1, had that moment, spun, and then basically got beached in the gravel. Other drivers did have moments at that corner, but none quite as spectacularly as Perez, and those conditions were arguably much trickier than when Perez had his incident. In the Grand Prix itself, did make up some progress early in the race, but Red Bull obviously thought it wasn't enough and decided to make a massive risk putting him on that strategy, pitting for intermediates during the first safety car. Or not during the first safety car, during the first rain cell. Of course, was then on that roller coaster rider strategy, ended up 2 minutes down, which based on the times that the leaders were doing, meant that he effectively ended up 3 minutes off the lead by the end of the Grand Prix. Now, I will remind people, he was effectively on the same strategy as Charles Leclerc. Leclerc was not lapped a second time, although I think he was actually pretty close. So they were effectively on the same strategy, so there's no reason that Perez couldn't have beaten Leclerc, especially since Red Bull was definitely the better car this weekend. Number 19, I'm going to go with Daniel Ricciardo. I'm going to need a new pen. Daniel Ricciardo, tough weekend for the Aussie this weekend, out-qualified by Yuki Tsunoda by a substantial margin in Q2. Q1, the margin wasn't so bad, but ended up starting the race a bit on the back foot. In the race, pace wasn't so good, kind of was falling a bit down through the order. Ended up, I believe, 13th, I believe, and of course his teammate ended up with points. So yeah, a bit of a disappointing weekend. Could have put him a little bit higher, but I think there weren't really any other drivers who I felt had a weekend that was as spectacularly bad as Perez's, and was almost entirely their fault. Alright, just grabbing the other blue pen that I have. Moving on to number 18, I'm going to go with Kevin Magnussen. Oh, that's much better. Kevin Magnussen. So for Magnussen, out-qualified, out-raced by his teammate, just like the other two drivers I have. Got caught out a bit, apparently. That's what he said in the interviews afterwards in qualifying, which is why he got knocked out in Q1. That being said, teammate got himself pretty high up in Q3 and got himself up in the points as well. But for Magnussen, a bit of a solid recovery drive, which is why I have him above Ricciardo. Thought the recovery drive was decent, taking the qualifying into account. But nonetheless, still a pretty poor weekend from Magnussen. Number 17, I'm going to go with Zhou. For Zhou, out-qualified Bottas for the first time this season, so that definitely requires commendation. But for Zhou, the race itself was pretty poor, starting on the soft tires. Meant that they were very limited with their tire strategy, especially when that first rain cell came. Don't know if it was his idea or the strategies team. I'll probably say it was the strategies team, but for Zhou, yeah, the race was very tricky after that, and basically ended up finishing last of the classified runners. Number 16, I've decided to go with Valtteri Bottas. For Bottas, out-raced Gio, stayed on the normal strategy that everyone else did. Pitted for interest, a second rain cell, pitted for dries again afterwards. Was last of that kind of group of drivers in the classification. Not a whole lot to comment on. Sauber didn't really have a ton of pace this weekend, so he was basically just kind of trundling around by himself for most of the weekend. Number 15, this is kind of a very tricky driver to kind of grade, mostly because they didn't really do a whole lot this weekend, and that is Pierre Gasly. So for Gasly, I could have easily just omitted him from the power rankings. I had only 19 drivers, but I said no, we'll just do all 20. For Gasly, qualified last, but that was because of his 50 place grid penalty that he incurred this weekend. I'm pretty sure that he took the penalty despite the fact he didn't actually start the Grand Prix. Retired after the formation lap with a gearbox issue, and yeah, that's really all that there was. So pretty not a whole lot to write for Gasly. Now for number 14, a driver who had another poor weekend, a lot of things going wrong, and it's something that's become a bit of a trend recently, and that is Charles Leclerc. So for Leclerc, out-qualified by his teammate Carlos Sainz, got knocked out in Q2 by Lance Stroll. Decided to go on the really risky strategy, the one that Perez went on, the one that Zhou went on. And that's something that I think, on one hand, you can say, well, the team decided to put him on the strategy, but on the other hand, all the other drivers, I think, were able to assess the conditions and said, no, dry tires is fine. I really feel like Leclerc should have been able to say the same thing, been able to assess the conditions and say, no, we're gonna suck it up and go through with it on these soft tires for these handful of laps, and we'll be in a much better position. If he had done that, don't think he would have challenged for the podium. Probably would have been fighting it out with Sainz for 5th place at the end of the race. But still, that's a lot better than where he ended up effectively a lap down, very close to 2 laps down. And yeah, after that decision to go on the intermediates very, very early, the race was basically ruined, and nothing that he could have done really would have saved that, except for a safety car. A safety car at any point in the Grand Prix would have saved a lot of those drivers in that bottom group. Number 13, Esteban Ocon, the last of the drivers in that who had that really terrible strategy today. For Ocon, out-qualified his teammate Pierre Gasly, but like I said, hard to really say much because Gasly didn't really set a lap at the end of Q1 because there wasn't much point in setting a lap time. For Ocon, and then Ocon started on the soft tires, which I think was a really poor decision. And then, of course, similar to Zhou, was kind of forced into that early pit stop for intermediate tires. That being said, for Ocon, he did beat Sergio Perez, and they were on very similar strategies. So I guess that's a plus. Not terrible. Taking those things into consideration, but still, not a great weekend for Ocon. Number 12. One of his best weekends of the season, and that is Logan Sargent. Finished in 11th on the road, of course, I guess helped by Russell's DNF, but still much closer to Alex Albon on pace. Got himself up into Q2, still qualified, but better than what we've seen recently. And then in the race pace was honestly pretty good, and actually for once was hurt by the fact that he was too close to Albon. So when he pitted, he kind of had to wait in the pit lane for a bit while the team did Albon's pit stop in front of him, but still, a good turn of form, from the American driver. Number 11, Fernando Alonso. So for Alonso, a bit of a tough weekend. Despite the fact that he's finished in the points, I have him outside of the top 10 of my power rankings. For Alonso, out-qualified by Lance Stroll and beaten by Stroll in the Grand Prix. So not a great result at the end of the day. Was a bit quicker than Stroll during the wet phase, and kind of got ahead of him there, but lost that place relative to his teammate, switching back to dry tires. I think Stroll, as well as Hülkenberg and a couple other drivers, basically pit the absolute perfect lap to pit, and for Alonso just kind of stayed out a bit too late on the intermediates, and then wasn't really able to do much after that on the dry tires. So a bit of a down weekend for Alonso. Definitely feels like he's had a lot more down weekends this year. And it's not even because Aston's a lot worse than they were last year, but just relative to Stroll, it feels like last year, Alonso was basically dominating Stroll pretty much every weekend, but this year, it definitely feels like Stroll's been able to have weekends where he's been the better of the two Aston drivers. Number 10, I'm going to go with Yuki Tsunoda. For Tsunoda, out-qualified and outraced his teammate. Another tricky weekend for RB. That being said, they still ended up with a point. I think Tsunoda would have been hoping for 2 points, not just a 1. But unfortunately for him, overtaken very close to the end of the Grand Prix. So only the 1 point for him. Not a whole lot more to add for Tsunoda. I think a really decent Grand Prix overall. Number 9, I'm going to go with Lance Stroll. So for Stroll, out-qualified and outraced his teammate. Fernando Alonso. Did a good job of qualifying him. I thought, strategically really good job. Only thing I would say for Stroll, a little bit lacking in pace when the rain hit, but that's understandable to not be as good as Alonso in wet conditions. But besides that, I thought really, really solid Grand Prix from Stroll. Number 8, I've gone with Alex Albon. So for Albon, I thought really good Grand Prix, out qualifying, out racing his teammate Logan Sargent. Ended up with 2 points, that doubles his point total for the season. Really valuable points for the Williams team overall. Number 7, I'm going to go with George Russell. So for Russell, qualified on pole. Qualifying, I think, went very, very well. The first part of the race in the dry conditions, did a really good job controlling the pace. Looked like he was in control of things. But as soon as the wet conditions hit, it became clear pretty quickly that he was just not able to keep up the pace that his teammate was, keep up the pace of the McLarens, or even keep up the pace of Max Verstappen. So for Russell, it was a bit of a tricky weekend for the at that point. A bit of a tricky race at that point, and then of course had the water car issue, which caused his retirement. So really unfortunate for him. It's hard to judge him. Of course, I would still put him in the positive, but I think because of those issues I had in the wet conditions, I do have him a little bit further down. Number 6, I'm going to go with Oscar Piastri. For Piastri, I honestly thought that the Aussie had a really strong weekend. Race pace looked very good, was really kind of screwed over by that first pit stop, pitting for intermediates a lap too late. Pitting for intermediates a lap too late. And that really kind of set him on the back foot. So even though his pace was very, very strong, possibly could have ended up with a podium, could have been a race win actually if things had gone a bit better. But for qualifying, I really felt like that qualifying session hurt him. If he had been able to start from the top 2 or 3 positions, who knows how that race turns out. Alright, moving into the top 5. For number 5, I'm going to go with Lando Norris. For Norris, out-qualified, out-raced his teammate. It did feel like he left a little bit on the table in qualifying for me. I do feel like he could have taken the fight to pole instead of having that massive gap that we ended up with between the 2 Mercedes and Norris in third. The race itself, first stint, very, very good on the dry tires. That being said, just kind of holding station. Did lose a position to Verstappen on the opening lap. The middle phase of the race, kind of in the wet conditions, very, very strong from Norris, was leading the Grand Prix. And that's really where I felt that Norris and the team really had to be a bit more decisive, be a bit more proactive with their decision making and not just wait for everyone else to make calls. They really should have pitted lap sooner, and then they would have been the Grand Prix winners most likely. The other mistake I think they made, this is more on the team, not on Norris himself, but again, similar to what I said with Leclerc, you have to be able to, generally, elite drivers, your Hamiltons, your Verstappens, they'll be able to dictate the strategy and say, I want to be on this tire at this time, I want to be on this tire at this time. And for Norris, I think it was really, he should have gone on the mediums. The team even sounded like on the radio that they really wanted to be on those medium tires too. But unfortunately, soft tires left him quite vulnerable to Verstappen behind in the closing stages of the race. But I think, a lot of really good pieces there for Norris. But I think, in terms of execution, I think there's still a lot of room for improvement. Number 4, I'm going to go with Carlos Sainz. For Sainz, finished 5th in the Grand Prix. Was really kind of in a race of his own after his teammate decided to go on his pit strategy adventure. For Sainz, did a good job of challenging Verstappen when the conditions got a bit wetter. But reality is, the Ferrari was the 4th quickest car today, finishing in P5, I believe it was. Is a really, really good result, all things considered. And I think Sainz just did a really solid job, similar to what he did in Austria. Just did a really similar job. The podium fell to him last time. This time, no podium, but still, I think a pretty impressive Grand Prix all around for the Spaniard. Number 3, I'm going to go with Nico Hülkenberg. For Hülkenberg, qualifying was amazing. Qualifying P6 in the Haas, out qualifying both Ferraris. The race itself, start of the race was a bit tricky. Lost positions on that opening lap, but still, when things kind of got settled, did a really good job of taking advantage of the timing of each of the pit stops to basically take back control of the race. For Hulkenberg, I think did a really good job switching to the intermediate tires that basically jumped him up to basically the best of the rest position, which Stroll had previously. And then in the last stop, perfect timing again to kind of maintain that lead and just kind of cruised home to a 6th-place finish, which is effectively, a win for the Haas team. So, almost pretty much a perfect weekend for Hulkenberg. Only small thing would be the start of the race where he lost those positions. But other than that, can't really complain. Number 2, I decided to go with Max Verstappen. It really feels like no one really had a perfect weekend. There's I think for pretty much every driver in the field, there's all little things that they could have done a little better, I felt. But that being said, I think, the drivers at the top, really, really good weekend overall for all of them. For Verstappen, qualifying Q1, obviously a bit of a struggle with that small mistake in Q1. Could he have gotten a better starting position for the Grand Prix? Maybe. Really hard to say, given that it really feels like the Red Bull was the 3rd best car this weekend on pace. So with that, I think Verstappen did a very good job to be able to get a 2nd place result. The pit strategy I felt was excellent and probably the best in the entire field. It really felt like the pace in the first stint was just nowhere. But the wet stint was pretty good, not as good as the McLaren's, as I would say I said before, but definitely that last stint on the hard tires was excellent. Being able to basically set fastest laps on those hard tires, whereas Hamilton Norris had fresh softs, was very, very impressive indeed. And that impressive pace really allowed him to overtake Norris and then challenge Hamilton for the win at the end. Now, of course, number 1, it's really hard to go against your race winner, especially when no one else I felt was perfect. If someone else had a perfect Grand Prix, I think you could have suggested putting him above Hamilton. But that being said, Hamilton, I think, had a very, very good Grand Prix himself. Really for Hamilton, the only thing I would really say, qualifying, again, out-qualified by his teammate, I think 10 races out of 12 now. And that's definitely, something that he's going to be a little bit concerned with going into the second half of the season and going into next season as well. After that, Hamilton's pace was very, very strong in that first wet phase of the Grand Prix, better than his teammate Russell. I don't think really as fast as the McLaren's, but it seemed like the McLaren's, for whatever reason, just absolutely worked in those conditions. And then, really, really decisive with the pit stop for dry tires. Picked just a perfect moment, and also kind of capitalizing on Norris staying out too long. And then, drove home a really, really solid pace in that final stint to get his first Grand Prix since the 2021 Saudi Arabian Grand Prix. So there you go. There's my power rankings for the 2024 British Grand Prix. Thank you so much for watching. Goodbye.